Today, we're going to be putting 35 by 12.5-inch tires on my 4th gen Tacoma. I'm going to show you guys everything from the install to what needs to be trimmed in order to do this as effectively as possible and inherently improve the off-road capability, because anything that compromises it, not going to happen. So we're going to be utilizing a trail kit from Peak Suspension, a set of Sahara wheels from Nomad, in hopes to get something that looks a little bit like this. Now, what we're missing here is tires. So before we talk about any of this stuff or get started, we're gonna go get some BF Goodrich K02s, my favorite tire. I live in Canada, it's winter here half the year, so an all-terrain is perfect. I've had this tire 5 times. This will be the 6th. Needless to say, I like it. So let's go. 17-inch wheels wrapped in a 35-inch tire, in my opinion, is the perfect tire to wheel ratio. It looks so solid, especially on a smaller truck like a Tacoma. So before we start busting bolts off the truck, there's one thing I want to take care of, one thing that the detailer inside me has to do. And that, of course, is going to be ceramic coating the wheels. So I'm going to use Stance by Kamikaze. This is a Japanese brand on a Toyota. We'll call that Synergy. The reason we're doing this before the suspension is just so that it has a few hours to cure, so we're not putting on wet wheels. Now the process is extremely easy. We're gonna wipe the faces and the barrels down with an isopropyl mixture, 1:1 to water. This removes any grease, debris, oils, just anything that's on the surface of the wheel so the coating can adhere properly. We're then going to apply the coating to the barrel extremely liberally and leave it there. We're not gonna level this out or remove it, we're just gonna leave it. As you can see, this wheel, you can barely see the barrel, so we're not gonna have to worry about high spots. And this just allows for a lot better, more longer term protection on the back of the wheel, which is gonna have a very hard time getting cleaned here. For the faces, you're gonna apply the coating to the entire face, making sure you get in every little nook and cranny, especially around the lug nuts. Leave it there for 2 to 3 minutes, take a microfiber towel, level it out, and then we're gonna let the wheels cure for about 6 to 8 hours. While they're curing, we're gonna install the suspension on the truck, and then we can throw these on. I'm using to lift the truck is made by Peak Suspension. All the products are made in the USA, which is great. This kit specifically is called the Trail Kit, and it's made for the 4th gen Tacoma. It's gonna lift the front end 2¼ inch and the rear end 1 inch, utilizing a bunch of really nice billet parts. This specific trim of Tacoma comes with the Bilstein shocks with the piggyback from factory. If you watch this channel, a lot of my interest lies within old BMWs, and those cars are kind of synonymous with Bilstein products, so I did want to keep them at least for a little bit. It is a little bit special to me, so this kit is going to allow me to do that and do it in the best way possible. For the front end, we're gonna remove the coilover, take the spring off. This part is gonna sit on top of the perch. The spring is gonna go back on top. We're gonna bolt on the top hat, and then this is gonna slide onto the studs on the top of the top hat. This being in 2 sections is what is going to help the truck ride like factory. A lot of the negativity or roughness that comes with spacer or collar lifts is because people stack all this height into one section and it's this rock solid bit. Having it dispersed allows that spring to really function like factory, which is exactly what we want. For the rear, super simple, 1 inch spring spacer. This goes on top of the spring pad goes on top, throw it back in the truck. It's easy as that. And of course, Nomad lug nuts. We need these just because the spacing on the wheels is thinner, so the OEM ones don't work. And these are cooler and better anyway. So what we're gonna start with is the rear. All right, spring is out. Super simple. Jack one side of the truck up, jack stand under the frame, drop the axle, undo the lower shock bolt, the sway bar end link that attaches to the frame, and then just slowly drop that one side of the axle and wiggle this thing out. It should come out pretty easy. I don't think I dropped the axle enough to get the lift on and then get it back in, so you'll see me throw some spring compressors on this just so it goes in easier. If you have those, they're very convenient. If you don't, you may need to drop the axle just a little bit more than you think because this spring is taller than I had thought. think that looks perfect. This tire and wheel size is pretty much perfect for the 4th gen body style, in my opinion, and installation extremely easy. If you're wondering about torque values, the bottom shock bolt is 72 foot-pounds. The sway bar end link to the frame is 62 foot-pounds. Wheel studs, when they're on aluminum wheels, is 97 foot-pounds. And these aren't assumptions. These are all from the Toyota, not the manual, but the program that the mechanics get at the dealership. So it should be 100% accurate. One thing I did want to talk about was the wheel fitment and why I chose this. So this Nomad wheel, the Sahara, is a 17 by 8.5 with a 0 offset. Now, a lot of guys, when they're doing 35s on the 4th gens, they are doing a higher or a lower offset, depending on how you look at it, a plus 25, a plus 38, something that sets the wheel in closer to the truck. And that's fair. This is all just personal preference, so don't take any of this as something you have to do. It's just opinion. But for me, when they're doing those higher offsets and the tires tucked in closer and running 35s, because the truck is so small body, I find they're looking a bit too tall, like taller than it is wide. And for me, it just doesn't necessarily look right. Another thing I took into consideration, which is probably stemming from my more so car-brained wheel fitment visual desires, is that if you go off this curve section of the fender flare and if you fell naturally, it's gonna line up with the sidewall of the tire perfectly, rather than lining it up with the flat section of the fender, which I think some of those higher offsets are doing. So personal preference, the 0 offset is perfect for me, but again, you can do whatever you want. You could have a negative 100 offset and have it out here. You could tuck it into the frame, whatever you like. It's all personal preference, what makes this stuff so much fun. Coilover is out, and it came out super easy. So the way I chose to do it, sway bar end link, disconnect it from the lower control arm. There's 2 bolts that hold the lower control arm to the spindle, pop those out. The bolts that hold the lower control arm to the frame, you don't need to remove them, you just loosen them a little bit, allowing the lower control arm to swing down like that, meaning you can get that lower shock bolt out and then pull the whole coilover assembly between the tie rod and the axle. It looks tight, but there's plenty of room. And of course, there's 4 bolts at the top of the coilover. Those come out super easy. It's a new truck, so nothing's rusty, meaning everything's significantly easier to work on. But even then, this was pretty simple. And just a side note, that is the farthest up front I've ever had a jack stand on a vehicle. That just looks kind of weird, but it's on the frame, so we're good. Now I'm going to compress the spring on this coilover so I can clean it up and get the peak suspension kit in there. Everything that we touched is now hand tight. You typically want to wait till your wheel is on to re-torque things, but it's beyond extremely awkward to do. So a good way to mimic that is put a floor jack under the lower control arm and lift it just till it starts coming off the jack. This is gonna simulate what it would be like to have the weight on the suspension. It's not gonna be exact, but it's pretty dang close to where I'm comfortable torquing everything down to spec this way. The torque values are as follows. So the nuts that hold on the top hat of the coilover, 33 foot-pounds. The bottom bolt and nut are 133 foot-pounds. The sway bar end link to the lower control arm is 103 foot-pounds. And lastly, the two bolts at the bottom of the lower control arm to the spindle are 221 foot-pounds. Didn't have a lot of fun doing that. I already did those ones now. I'm gonna move through to the other ones. I'll throw the wheel on and we'll switch it up to the other side. Reinstallation on this side is identical. Same process, same torque spec, same everything. I did just want to talk about this right here. So to the right of the mud flap, behind this little carpet fender liner, there is a crash bar, I think everyone's calling it. You pop that fender liner off, 3 little clips there, and then there's 3 17mm bolts, I'm gonna say. Pop those off, and what you're left with is this. It's honestly a solid like 3 inches that it sticks out. So everyone that's doing, I've heard both 33s and 35s is removing that to add a ton of turning radius. As you can see, that would be a trouble point. The front is tucked up quite a bit higher, but that right there is a problem. So I'm gonna pop that off now. I'm gonna leave the mud flap for now and just see what happens with turning, but cross member, crash bar coming off, mud flap staying on. We'll throw on that 4th wheel and we'll get a final look at what this is gonna look like. I had seen these wheels so many times on so many different Toyotas that I knew I was gonna love them, but when they're finally on your own truck, it's so much better. Any Toyota, Nomad wheels, perfect combination every single time. And this height with the peak suspension trail kit, I think is perfect. It doesn't look obnoxiously high. It's just enough to clear those bigger tires and not really sacrifice any articulation from the factory height. So I am loving this. In terms of trimming, removing that crash bar freed up a ton of space. This is the next day, of course. I drove this home. turning fully side to side each way. Try doing it at some angles where it was flexing just a little bit, because typically if it doesn't hit on a flat ground, typically if you're turning full bore and then the truck starts articulating, it may bunch up into the fender. There was a little bit of that, but it was just catching the edge of the carpet, so I may end up trimming that, but I'm gonna wait a few more days, gather a little bit of information, do some experimenting, and then move on from there. But in terms of just regular driving, this is clear, fine, completely good to go. Now, wheels, link in the description, suspension, link in the description. Now I'm gonna take it outside, show you guys what it looks like in full, and if you have any questions about this, just drop them in the comments and I'll try to get back to everyone. Thank you for watching.